Welcome back to the deep dive. We are shifting gears today. Usually we're looking at things like tech trends or, complex geopolitical shifts, but today we're doing some historical excavation.
A bit of an archaeological dig into a name.
Exactly. We're looking at a name that is completely embedded in the English language. You know the word. You probably have a very specific image in your head when I say it.
It's one of those rare instances where a person's last name just becomes a common noun. Like sandwich or shrapnel or boycott.
Perfect examples. We're talking about Amelia Bloomer, and the word, of course, is bloomers.
Which immediately conjures images of like baggy underwear or those really billowy pants from the Victorian era.
It's funny because even today, if you say someone is wearing bloomers, everyone knows exactly what you mean.
It's iconic.
Absolutely. Right. The bloomer costume. It is arguably one of the most famous and most ridiculed fashion statements in all of American history. But here's the thing, and this is really why we are doing this deep dive. If you think Amelia Bloomer is just the funny pants lady, you are missing the actual story.
Oh, completely.
In fact, you're missing the story of how women's media was basically invented.
That is the absolute core of it. The pants are they're actually a bit of a red herring. They are the hook, the flashy object that catches your eye. But the real substance is that Amelia Bloomer was a media mogul before that term even existed.
A media mogul, I like.
She was a pioneer of the free press and a woman who figured out how to amplify a voice when society was trying very, very hard to silence it.
And there is a twist coming up right at the top of the hour regarding those pants, isn't there?
Oh, yeah, there is. A pretty significant historical correction.
I love a good correction. So let's look at the roadmap. Our mission today is to move past the caricature. We've got a stack of biographical records, we've got archives from the New York Tribune, and some really deep historical analyses of the suffrage movement.
So we're really going to try and unpack this.
Yeah, we are going to map out how a woman from Homer, New York became a household name, why that fame might be a little misplaced, and the complex, sometimes controversial legacy she left behind.
It's a journey from accidental fashion icon to a very deliberate political operator.
Yeah.
And we'll also touch on why, later in life, she walked away from the very thing that made her famous.
Okay, let's start with that accident. The myth is that Amelia Bloomer invented bloomers, that she woke up one day, looked at her heavy Victorian dress and said, nope, I'm cutting this off and putting on trousers. True or false?
False. Completely and utterly false. Amelia Bloomer did not invent the bloomer costume. She wasn't even the first person to wear it in public.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is the one thing she is famous for. I mean, if you look her up, the first thing that comes to mind is she's the lady who invented the pants.
I know, it's wild.
So if she didn't invent them, who are we stealing the credit from? Who is the actual designer here?
The credit really belongs to a woman named Elizabeth Smith Miller. She's often referred to in the records as Libby Miller.
Wow.
This dates back to early 1851.
1851. Okay, let's contextualize the fashion landscape for a second. Because to understand why pants were so revolutionary, we have to understand what the baseline was. What was the standard operating procedure for a woman getting dressed in 1851?
It was an absolute ordeal. I mean, we're talking about the height of the Victorian era. The silhouette was all about volume and just restriction. A woman would be wearing a corset, which was often laced tightly enough to restrict breathing and, displace internal organs.
The fainting couch existed for a reason.
Exactly.
It wasn't just drama, it was literally a lack of oxygen.
Precisely. But it wasn't just the corset, it was the weight. To get those wide skirts, you weren't using hoops yet. Those came a bit later. You were wearing layers and layers of heavy starched petticoats.
How many layers are we talking about?
We are talking about 10 to 15 pounds of fabric just dragging from your waist.
15 pounds. Imagine strapping a bowling ball to your waist and then trying to, walk up the stairs.
Or just go about your day. And this is in an era before paved sidewalks were common, you have to remember. So you're dragging 15 pounds of cotton and wool through mud and horse manure, slush, dust.
Oh, God. It sounds like a hygiene nightmare.
It was unsanitary, it was heavy, and it was physically debilitating. If you were carrying a child or trying to walk up a flight of stairs, the dress was an active, meaningful impediment to your movement.
So you're basically a prisoner in your own clothes.
You literally had one hand occupied at all times, just holding your skirt up so you wouldn't trip and die.
So enter Libby Miller. She's a temperance activist, she's practical, and she just decides she's had enough. What does she come up with?
She creates what she calls the rational costume. And that word rationale is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. It's a direct critique of the irrationality of standard fashion.
She wanted clothes that made sense.
Exactly.
What did it look like? Because I think we have this sort of cartoonish idea of it, but what was the actual construction?
Well, it consisted of loose trousers gathered at the ankle. At the time, these were often called Turkish trousers because they mimicked the style of dress seen in the Middle East and Central Asia.
So basically, very billowy pants, kind of like what we might call harem pants today.
Effectively, yes. Very loose, but gathered right at the ankle so they wouldn't get caught on anything. And over these trousers, she wore a skirt, but a shortened one. It came down to about 4 inches below the knee.
Okay, so you still have the modesty of the skirt. You aren't just walking around in leggings or something,
Well,
but you have the freedom of your limbs underneath.
precisely. And she often topped it with a vest or a short jacket. It was just practical. You could move, you could garden, you could walk briskly without fear of tripping. It was freedom.
So Libby Miller is rocking this look. How does it get from her closet to Amelia Bloomer's fame?
It's a classic chain of influence, almost like a game of telephone. Liddy Miller goes to Seneca Falls, New York, to visit her cousin, and her cousin just happens to be Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Wow. Which is a name that should ring a massive bell for anyone listening. Stanton is like the philosopher king of the American women's rights movement.
She is the intellectual heavyweight,
Yeah.
the primary writer and thinker. So Miller shows up in the pants. Stanton, who had just spent years raising a house full of small children and fighting with these heavy dresses, sees the outfit and immediately says, "This is brilliant."
I can just imagine her relief.
She called it sensible and becoming. She saw the genius of it right away.
So Stanton starts wearing them too?
Stanton adopts the look immediately. She cuts her dresses. And then Stanton, wearing the outfit, goes to visit her friend and neighbor, Amelia Bloomer.
And this is the flashpoint. This is the moment.
This is it. Amelia Bloomer sees the outfit. She is also a practical woman. She's active. She's working. She loves the idea. She adopts the costume.
But here is the key question. If Miller invented it, and Stanton, who was, let's be honest, much more famous than Bloomer at the time, wore it, why do we call them Bloomers and not Millers or Stantons?
Because Amelia Bloomer had something the other two didn't.
Let me guess.
She had a printing press.
Ah, she controlled the distribution.
Exactly.
Oh.
Amelia Bloomer was the editor and proprietor of a newspaper called The Lily. When she started wearing the outfit, she didn't just wear it to the grocery store. She wrote about it.
She put it in print.
She published engravings of herself in the outfit. She wrote these long, passionate editorials defending the rational costume against its critics. She used her platform to advocate for it.
It's the difference between having a great idea and having a marketing budget.
Or, to use a modern analogy, Libby Miller invented the dance, but Amelia Bloomer was the influencer with 10 million followers who made it go viral on TikTok.
That is a perfect comparison. It's the platform that dictates the legacy, not the invention.
And it worked. The New York Tribune, which was the biggest paper in the country at the time, run by Horace Greeley, picked up the story. But they picked it up from Amelia's coverage in The Lily.
So when the Tribune writes about it, they cite Amelia Bloomer as the source.
Correct. They attribute it to her. They start calling it the Bloomer costume, or, for short, just Bloomers. And the name stuck. Poor Libby Miller became a footnote because she didn't own the media outlet.
It really just speaks to the power of platform. You can be the innovator, but the person who controls the narrative gets the naming rights.
Always.
But let's talk about the reaction. Because today, if a woman wears pants, nobody blinks. But in 1851, this wasn't just a fashion don't, it was a moral panic.
It was treated as a fundamental threat to the fabric of society. You have to understand the Victorian concept of separate spheres.
Okay, break that down for us.
The idea was that men and women were naturally designed for different worlds. Men occupy the public sphere, business, politics, war. Women occupy the domestic sphere, home, children, morality. And clothing was the most important visual marker of that separation.
So clothes make the man, or in this case, the woman.
Exactly. Men wore bifurcated garments, pants.
Bifurcated garments. I like that. 2 legs.
2 legs. Women wore skirts. And by wearing pants, even underneath a skirt, these women were seen as usurping male authority. They were wearing the pants in the family. Quite literally, it was a visual claim to equality.
And the backlash was severe.
The ridicule was ceaseless. The source material we have is just full of accounts of intense harassment women faced for wearing them.
The notes mention street harassment specifically. What did that look like?
It was intense. People would follow them down the street, jeering, shouting insults. Little boys would throw rocks or snowballs at them.
Rocks for wearing pants.
Absolutely. And in the press, it was even worse. There were these vicious cartoons in the newspapers depicting women and bloomers smoking cigars and abandoning their babies, implying that if you wear pants, you stop being a woman, you stop being a mother.
It's the classic slippery slope argument. First, it's the pants. Next, it's total social anarchy.
Exactly. Ministers preached sermons against them from the pulpit, citing Deuteronomy, which forbids women from wearing that which pertaineth unto a man.
It is absolutely incredible to think that a pair of baggy trousers can trigger biblical condemnation.
It just shows how fragile the gender hierarchy was felt to be. If the only thing keeping women in their place was a heavy skirt, that's a pretty precarious system.
So Amelia Bloomer is in the eye of this storm. Her name is on the pants. She's defending them in the lily. She's taking all the heat. But then, and this is the part of the story that's usually left out, she quits. She stops wearing them.
She does. By 1859, so about 8 years after the craze started, Amelia Bloomer retires the costume and goes back to wearing long skirts.
Why? I mean, that feels like a surrender. It feels like the bullies won.
It really does on the surface.
Yeah.
But it was a strategic retreat. And her reasons, which she documented, are fascinatingly pragmatic. She wasn't giving up on equality. She was changing tactics.
Okay. So what was reason number one?
The first reason was what we might call social lubrication. In 1854, she and her husband moved west to Council Bluffs, Iowa.
So she's in a new town on the frontier. She's the new girl.
Right. And she wanted to integrate. She wanted to influence her neighbors on issues she cared about, like temperance and voting. But she found that as long as she was the weird lady in the clown pants, nobody would listen to her.
The medium was undermining the message.
Perfectly put. The clothes were a barrier to communication. She felt socially isolated. But there's also a technological shift that gave her an out, so to speak.
It's a technology shift.
The invention of the crinoline.
Okay, let's unpack the crinoline. Because when I think crinoline, I think of those giant southern belle gawn with the wind dresses that look like they take up a whole room. That does not seem more comfortable.
Visually, they were huge. But structurally, they were a breakthrough. Before the crinoline, remember, that volume was achieved by wearing 6, 7, 8 layers of heavy wool and cotton petticoats. It was hot, it was heavy, and it dragged on your hips.
Right, the 15 tons of fabric.
The crinoline was a cage. It was a lightweight structure made of flexible steel or whalebone that you wore under the dress.
So it's mostly air.
It's mostly air. And it suspended the fabric away from the legs. So suddenly, you could walk without the fabric tangling between your knees. It was lightweight. It solved the physical problem, the weight, and the restriction without violating the social norm of the long skirt.
That is such a fascinating nuance. We look back at the crinoline as the symbol of female oppression, but for Amelia Bloomer, it was actually a liberation technology.
It was a practical solution. It allowed her to conform socially while being comfortable physically. And finally, she explicitly said she felt there were more important things to focus on. She realized the clothes were a distraction from the real fight.
Which was the fight for the vote.
The vote, property rights, legal standing. She decided she was losing the war because she was fighting the wrong battle.
More important things. That is a great transition point, because while the world was obsessed with her wardrobe, she was building something much, much more significant. Let's pivot to the lily.
Yes. This is the crown jewel of her legacy. And we have to really underscore this. Amelia Bloomer was the first woman to own, operate, and edit a newspaper for women in the United States.
That is a massive claim. We are talking 1849.
1849.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, in many states, married women didn't even have the right to own property or keep their own wages.
Yeah.
If a woman worked, her money legally belonged to her husband. And here she is owning a media company.
Why a newspaper? Why not just get on a stage and give speeches?
Because the podium was forbidden. It was considered unseemly or even promiscuous for a woman to speak to a mixed audience, meaning an audience with men in it.
Promiscuous.
Yes. The idea was that a woman displaying herself on stage for public consumption was akin to prostitution.
Wow. That is a heavy, heavy stigma.
Very heavy. But writing was seen as domestic. You did it at a desk in your home. It was quiet. It was viewed as a respectable backdoor into public discourse. You could write a letter and a man could read it aloud, and that was acceptable.
So she finds the loophole.
She finds the loophole.
So she launches the Lily, but it didn't start as a firebrand suffrage paper, did it?
No, not at all. It started as a temperance journal.
Temperance being the anti-alcohol movement.
Right. It was originally the official newsletter for the Seneca Falls Ladies Temperance Society.
Yeah.
And get this. The original plan was for it to be published by a committee of ladies.
A committee of ladies. That just sounds so safe. So non-threatening. Very teen cookies.
Extremely safe. And, predictably very ineffective.
Hmm.
Committees are where bold ideas go to die. By 1850, a year in, the other ladies had lost interest. The work was too hard, or maybe the criticism was too scary. They all dropped out.
But Amelia stayed.
Amelia stayed, and she took full ownership. She put her name, and only her name, on the masthead. Amelia Bloomer, editor. And that was the moment the voice of the paper changed.
How so? What was the shift?
Well, she started hanging out with deeper thinkers. She was already friends with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But as Stanton started writing for the paper, often under the pseudonym Sunflower, the content shifted dramatically.
From what to what?
It went from, say, don't let your husband drink too much, to why can't you divorce your husband if he's a violent drunk?
Whoa. Okay, that is a huge leap. That's moving from just moral persuasion to actual legal reform.
And from there, it's a very short step to we can't change the divorce laws because we can't vote. And suddenly, boom, the Lily is a suffrage paper. It became the voice for radical women's rights.
What kind of reach did she have? Because we tend to think of the 1800s as so disconnected. It's not like she could tweet out an article.
At its peak, the Lily had a circulation of over 4,000. Now, in the age of Instagram and millions of followers, that sounds like nothing. But in 1853, for a niche reform paper run by a woman, that is viral scale.
And newspapers back then had a pass-along rate, right? One copy would be read by the whole family, then given to the neighbors, then maybe left at the general store.
Exactly. So her actual readership was likely tens of thousands. She was reaching women on farms in the Midwest, women in cities in the East. She was creating a network of shared ideas. For the first time, she was giving isolated women a sense of community, a feeling that they weren't alone in their frustrations.
She has this quote where she calls the paper a needed instrument to spread abroad the truth of a new gospel to women.
A new gospel, I love that phrasing. She saw it as a moral imperative, a mission. But she also admitted, I saw not the end from the beginning.
That's such a relatable sentiment for any entrepreneur or activist. You start pulling on one little thread and pretty soon the whole tapestry unravels.
It illustrates what you could call the activism spiral. You start with a symptom, in her case, alcoholism, and you end up diagnosing the systemic disease, a total lack of political power for women. The Lily documented that evolution in real time. It was like a diary of the movement waking up.
So she has the platform. And because she has the platform, she becomes a magnet for people, a hub. Which brings us to her role as the great connector. There is a specific moment in history, a literal meeting on a street corner, that changed everything.
This is one of my favorite what-ifs of history. Seriously, if this meeting doesn't happen, the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, might have been delayed by decades.
Okay, set the scene for us.
It's May of 1851, Seneca Falls, New York. You have two women who are at this point complete strangers. On one side, you have Elizabeth Cady Stanton. As we said, she's the writer, the philosopher, the radical thinker. But she's pretty much housebound with a bunch of kids. She's frustrated and brilliant, but she's stuck.
She's the brains of the operation, but she's tethered to the house.
On the other side, you have Susan B. Anthony. She is a Quaker, a teacher, a brilliant organizer. She's the strategist. She's the boots on the ground. She has the mobility and the tactical mind to execute a national campaign.
She's the muscle, the operator.
But they don't know each other. They are the Lennon and McCartney of the women's rights movement, but they haven't met. They're operating in totally different spheres.
And who introduces them?
Amelia Bloomer.
So they are literally just walking down the street. How did it happen?
Yes. Anthony was in town for an anti-slavery lecture. Bloomer, who knew both of them separately, saw them on a street corner and just made the introduction. There is a statue of this exact moment in Seneca Falls today. It's called When Anthony Met Stanton. It depicts the three of them.
And that spark from that introduction ignites the partnership that drove the women's movement for the next 50 years.
50 years. Stanton would write the speeches, and Anthony, who was unmarried and childless, would travel the country delivering them. It was the perfect partnership.
It's amazing, because if you look at that statue or read the history books, Bloomer is often the third wheel. Stanton and Anthony are the icons. Bloomer is. Well, she's the lady with the pants.
It's so ironic, isn't it? But it speaks to her specific talent. She wasn't the greatest orator. That was Stanton. She wasn't the relentless campaigner. That was Anthony. She was the node. She was the infrastructure.
The connector.
The connector. She used her newspaper to connect ideas, and she used her social circle to connect leaders.
It really makes you think about the different roles in any movement or any company, really. You need the stars, but you also need the person who owns the venue.
Yeah.
You need the person who makes the email intro. You need the person who publishes the newsletter that gets everyone on the same page.
Without the infrastructure, the stars have nowhere to shine. Bloomer built the stage that Stanton and Anthony stood on for the rest of their lives.
Now, we have painted a pretty glowing picture so far. A pioneer, a mogul, a connector, but we need to complicate this. Because Amelia Bloomer, like almost everyone in the 19th century, was a complex figure with beliefs that don't always align with our modern standards of radical.
No, she was a study in contradictions. We often project this modern girl boss feminism onto her, but she was a Victorian woman with some deep conservative streaks.
Let's start with the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, the birthplace of the movement. She was there, right, in the room where it happened.
She was there, she sat in the audience. But when the Declaration of Sentiments was passed around, this was the core document, modeled on the Declaration of Independence, demanding equality in the vote. She did not sign it.
Wait. The woman who ran the suffrage newspaper didn't sign the suffrage declaration? That seems wildly out of character. Why?
At the time, she felt it was too radical. Specifically, she was worried about her standing in the Episcopal Church. The Declaration was seen as contrary to church teachings on the submission of women. She just wasn't ready to cross that line yet. She was a devout woman, and the conflict between her faith and this new radicalism was very real for her.
That is fascinating. It shows that radicalization is a process. She didn't start at 100%. She had to be convinced, even of her own movement.
Exactly. She evolved. The convention inspired her to start the paper a year later, and the paper eventually radicalized her. But she always kept one foot in the world of respectability. She wanted change, but she wanted it to happen within the bounds of what she considered proper Christian behavior.
But there is a darker side to this complexity, one that has come up in recent years and has had real-world consequences for her legacy, and that's about race.
Yes, this is a very important modern reevaluation. For a long time, the American Library Association, the ALA, had a prestigious list of feminist books for young readers called the Amelia Bloomer list. It was a huge badge of honor for authors.
I've heard of that, but that changed recently in 2020.
It did. The committee voted unanimously to change the name to Rise, a feminist book project. They stripped Amelia's name from the award.
What was the specific charge against her? What did the researchers find that prompted such a big move?
It centered on her silence regarding the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850.
Let's just clarify what that law was for our listeners. This wasn't just a law about slavery in the South.
No, it was a federal law that required citizens in free states, like New York where she lived, to actively assist in the capture and return of escaped enslaved people. It effectively nationalized the machinery of slavery.
So if you saw a person escaping to freedom in Canada, you were legally obligated to turn them in?
You were. It was a moral abomination to abolitionists. It was the central crisis of the decade.
And Amelia Bloomer had a newspaper. She had a massive platform.
And she didn't use it. The criticism is that while she was vociferous about the rights of white women, she refused to take a stand against the Fugitive Slave Law. She didn't advocate for the freedom of black women and men when that issue was the defining moral crisis of the nation.
This highlights that friction we see so often in first-wave feminism. The movement was not a monolith. You had abolitionists who were also suffragists, but you also had suffragists who were willing to ignore racial justice to advance their own cause.
Exactly. And the historians and librarians today are saying, we can acknowledge her contributions to media and dress reform, but we cannot hold her up as the ultimate symbol of feminist intersectionality because she just wasn't one. It complicates the hero narrative.
It's about holding two truths at once. She built the megaphone, but she was very selective about who she used it for.
That's the nuance of history. It's not about erasing her or canceling her, but about accurately describing the boundaries of her activism. She was a pioneer, but she was a pioneer with blinders on. And seeing those blinders helps us understand the limitations of the movement she helped build.
So moving on from that controversy, let's look at her later years. We mentioned she moved to Iowa. This is the 1850s. Iowa is the Wild West at this point.
It really was. Council Bluffs was a major jumping-off point for the Oregon Trail. It was a rough, dusty frontier town. For many Americans, it was the edge of the known world.
Did she just retire to a rocking chair, put her feet up?
Far from it. She sold the lily to a woman in Indiana, mainly because the postal distribution from Iowa was too difficult. I mean, getting paper and ink out to the frontier was a logistical nightmare. But she did not stop speaking.
There's a great anecdote about a speech she gave in 1855.
Oh, this is fantastic. It's July 4th, 1855. She crosses the Missouri River to Omaha, Nebraska. Now, you have to picture this. Omaha wasn't a city. It was barely a settlement. It's the 4th of July, so there's likely drinking, shooting, a very rowdy, male-dominated frontier crowd.
This is not a polite literary parlor in New York.
Not even close. And Amelia stands up
In front of this crowd.
in front of this crowd and delivers a full-throated speech on women's rights and suffrage in the middle of the frontier. That takes a level of physical courage that I think we seriously underestimate. She is telling these rough frontiersmen that their wives and daughters deserve the vote.
She was a true believer right to the end.
She was. She went on to serve as the president of the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association well into the 1870s. She campaigned tirelessly. She helped shape the early laws of the state of Iowa regarding women's property rights. She never quit the cause.
I also want to give a shout out to a supporting character we haven't mentioned much, Dexter Bloomer, her husband.
A rare breed for the 19th century, that's for sure.
Usually when you hear about these radical women, the husbands are either absent, disapproving, or actively obstructing them. But Dexter seems different.
He was incredibly supportive. He was a newspaperman himself, which is how she got into it. He actually encouraged her to write her first articles. He taught her the business. He showed her how to run the press. He saw her as an equal partner.
And the notes say he even made lifestyle changes for her cause.
He did. To support her temperance work, her first big cause, he gave up drinking completely.
That is real solidarity. Honey, if you're leading the national crusade against whiskey, I guess I'm putting down the tumbler.
A supportive partner was a strategic asset. Having a husband who didn't feel emasculated by her fame or her pants or her public speaking allowed her to do the work she did. He was her partner in every sense of the word.
Amelia Bloomer died in 1894. She is buried in Council Bluffs, but her legacy has taken some very strange turns since then. We talked about the pants, we talked about the Canceled Book Award, but there is one honor she received that is truly surprising given her early reluctance to sign that declaration.
The church.
The Episcopal Church, the
Yeah.
same one she was so afraid of offending back in 1848.
Very saint. The Episcopal Church has a calendar of holy women and holy men. It's basically their list of saints and commemorations. Amelia Bloomer is on that list.
She's a saint, like Saint Amelia.
She is commemorated as a holy woman. Her feast day is July 20th. And get this, she is listed alongside Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman.
That is a fascinating full circle. From refusing to sign a political document because of religious fear to being canonized by that same religion for her political work.
It shows that institutions change, too. The Church of 1995 recognized what the Church of 1848 could not, that her fight for women was a moral, spiritual work. It validates that initial instinct she had that this was a new gospel was actually recognized by the Church in the end.
So we've unpacked the pants, the paper, the politics, and the sainthood. We've seen the viral moments and the problematic silences. When we zoom out and look at Amelia Bloomer's life as a whole, what is the synthesis? What is the big takeaway?
I think the synthesis is this. Amelia Bloomer proves the power of the platform. She didn't invent the reform ideas. She didn't design the pants. She didn't write the core philosophy of the movement, but she built the communication network.
She was the amplifier.
She was the amplifier. She illustrates that you don't have to be the original genius to be the most important person in the room. You just have to be the one who connects the genius to the audience.
That's a great way to put it.
She gave women a voice when they weren't allowed on stage. She was the friend who introduces you to your best business partner. She was the one who said, I have a printing press and I'm going to use it.
It really challenges the great man or great woman theory of history where we only look at the singular heroes. Amelia Bloomer was the infrastructure of the movement. Without the pipes, the water just doesn't flow.
Exactly. And it is a tragedy of history that she is remembered for the one thing she walked away from, the pants, rather than the tools she built to change the world, the newspaper. The newspaper was her true life's work. The pants were just a chapter.
That brings us to a provocative final thought for you, the listener. We live in an age that is absolutely obsessed with content creation and with influencers. We are all looking for the next viral idea, but Amelia Bloomer's story raises a really interesting question. Is the most powerful person the one who invents the idea or the person who builds the platform that spreads it? Amelia Bloomer is a household name because of a pair of pants she didn't invent, but her real power, the power that helped change the Constitution, lay in the printing press she owned. So in your own life, in your own work, are you trying to invent the bloomers or are you building the lily?
That is the question.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.